5.
We always hear, don't we, from the political class that we must smash the smuggling gangs, but our governments turn out to be the biggest gang of all.
4.
You're saying the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change is dangerous?
I would say it is, yes, absolutely dangerous.
3.
Your co-pilot is about to self-combust and end up in a little pile of ash on the floor. You may have to come round with a dustbuster.
2.
Is there a skull and crossbone on your office door at the moment? Abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Allison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. It's been dubbed the most expensive email in history, for it came to light on Tuesday that back in 2022, a Royal Marine inadvertently circulated a spreadsheet containing the details of 25,000 Afghans and their families who'd helped British troops during the UK's 20-year war with the Taliban. The unidentified Marine was trying to check that certain Afghans applying for the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, known as ARAP, allowing them and their dependents to live in Britain, had indeed fought alongside British forces. In emailing out the entire spreadsheet, though, thousands of lives were put at risk, and the cost of clearing up the mess has been estimated by the government at £7 billion. That's equivalent to an entire penny on income tax. This came to light due to the lifting of a highly controversial super injunction, which prevented the Telegraph and others from reporting on this catastrophe at all. Your column this week, Allison, separately rails against the prosecution by the British government of SAS veterans of the Northern Ireland conflict, link in the show notes to this episode. But this super injunction fiasco provides a grim and hugely costly security services backdrop to that important issue highlighted by you. Costly not only in terms of Afghan lives, but also UK taxpayers' money. Talking of which, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been out and about, giving the annual Mansion House speech on Tuesday night to city grandees, only to be hit on Wednesday morning with another increase in inflation, which was 3.6% during the year to June, way above the Bank of England's 2% target. I wrote more about tax in Sunday's Telegraph, again link in the show notes, about why, amidst warnings of yet more tax rises to come, Reeves might want to take at least 1 or 2 leaves, co-pilot, out of Gordon Brown's Treasury Handbook. Yep, I'm not joking, as I'll explain. We've got a tremendous Planet Normal guest, a seasoned industrialist reporting from the front line of UK manufacturing as he and his company grapple with net zero policies. But the story that really caught our collective eye this week was the plight of a lovely young lady called Courtney from Warwickshire who, having been asked to dress up for her school's day of culture, was sent home, Allison, for flying the flag of the country that she loves.
Oh, I've got to issue a warning, actually.
Is steam coming out of your ears?
It's not steam, Liam. It's not steam. You know those kind of sort
Wisdom.
of skull and crossbones they have on the side of electricity substations?
Or very strong chemicals? Is there a skull and crossbone on your office door at the moment?
Yes, do not approach.
Abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
Abandon hope, absolutely.
There be dragons. Oh, sorry.
There be Welsh dragons this week. Anyway, before we get on to I was just thinking about your introduction with Rachel Reeves. We're looking back nostalgically, aren't we, to the good old days when Gordon Brown sold the country's gold reserve for the price of a Karamak bar.
Yeah.
I mean,
wreck the country's pension system. Lovely.
Those were the days. Yeah, this story, I was going to say it's extraordinary, but of course in Diversity Britain, it's not extraordinary. Had 12-year-old Courtney Field, who attends Bilton School in Rugby, and the school had a culture celebration day last week. And as you said, Liam, Courtney, very, very bright young girl, grade A student. She went in a very, very nice Union Jack dress, much like the saucy one that Jerry Halliwell wore all those years ago.
Spice Girls fame, of course.
Yep. Girl power. And Courtney was planning to read a speech to celebrate her culture, celebrating Shakespeare, fish and chips, and the royal family. Wrong kind of culture, Halligan. very, very wicked white people British culture. So Courtney was told by teachers that her choice of clothing was unacceptable. She was hauled out of her lesson and she was made to sit in isolation in the reception until her dad, Stuart, was able to come and collect her. And look, there are many feelings provoked by this. We've had various listeners writing in, fuming, saying they didn't know whether to be furious or sad. But this is where we are. I should say that the school has now offered unreserved apologies to Courtney and said deeply regret the distress this has caused. But of course, it's emblematic, isn't it, Liam, of the fact that a young British girl excited to celebrate her culture, which last time we looked, I mean, obviously they're making strenuous efforts to import as many people from other cultures as possible. We'll get onto that in a minute. But at the moment, the Union Jack, British culture, fish and chips, the royal family, these are elements of the dominant national culture that people very much enjoy. But no, so this very left-wing school, which obviously tolerant, diverse, open community, has clamped down on this white British child's right to celebrate the traditions and the speech and the dress that she comes from.
Lots of emotions for me as well, Alison. I do think this is a very, very important story. I do think it's utterly outrageous. I'd like to apologise to young Courtney Wright.
Yes.
Well done for getting straight A's. Well done for wearing that lovely Jerry Halliwell dress. You look fantastic in it, looking at the photos. Don't be disheartened. I like to apologise on behalf of my generation because something has gone badly wrong. This would not have happened at a state school in my day. No. And whoever is responsible for this, really needs to take a long, hard look at themselves and remember that they are employed by the state, by taxpayers. This is absolutely outrageous. And looking at the letter that the school sent out, one other thing struck me, Alison, because the letter celebrating, saying to kids, come in dressed in, cultural garb, no football kit, fair enough. Otherwise, all the lads would come in and, my culture's Manchester City, my culture's Arsenal. Fair enough. You've got to make a bit of an effort. But I'm not having a go at this individual in person, but the letter was written by a wellbeing and culture coordinator. When I was at school, Alison, that was called my teacher and my other teacher and the games master and, the caretaker. And since when, why are we paying for well-being and culture coordinators when we've got one of the highest levels of functional illiteracy in the OECD? This is completely insane. And I'm glad that the Telegraph and other papers have brought this story to light. And I'm also glad that Keir Starmer has condemned the school's actions, though I get the feeling that he's only condemning the school's actions for sending home this lovely young girl who did nothing wrong at all. She showed a lot of imagination, I think, getting a Jerry Halliwell dress. I'm sure her and her mum had a good laugh and they went through some old Spice Girl songs that maybe the mum had listened to when she was a kid. Yeah. And that's exactly right. They're a fantastic, iconic band. That picture went around the world. Do you remember it?
Yeah.
And there she is. She's being knocked by her school. And Courtney, take strength from this. Take strength from the fact that even two-tier Keir has been forced, because it's so outrageous what this did to you, to go against the wokesters in his party by condemning the school for doing this. And you should give your speech, and you should send your speech into Planet Normal, and we'll read out parts of it as an email.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it feeds into some of these main stories of the week that you alluded to at the top, Liam. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I was in Parliament Square on Monday with veteran troops, amazing bunch of guys, and also some SAS veterans, retired officers, completely phenomenal. In fact, as I suggested to you earlier, I thought if we could just empty all the MPs out of Parliament into the River Thames and put Nick Kitson, George Sim and the boys from Hereford SAS squadron in charge, then country would be shipshape and Bristol fashion within a few days. But let's talk about this absolute gobsmacking scandal of many, many Afghans smuggled into the country first by the Conservative government and since July by the Labour government. And Liam, we always hear, don't we, from the political class that we must smash the smuggling gangs, but our governments turn out to be the biggest gang of all, flying thousands of Afghans into the UK in unmarked planes, distributing them around the country, not just in hotels, but in military bases. And I was told earlier today by an army person that their base, most of the housing now has been given to these Afghan families. The Afghan women are, of course, locked up indoors, and the men are prowling around the streets. The regular army wives, those are the wives of often of the men and sometimes obviously the partners of the female soldiers, who are having to run the gamut of these quite threatening foreign men. And you said in your introduction, Liam, I mean, there's a huge amount to unpack here about the leak of this spreadsheet containing the details of 25,000 Afghans who were said to have helped British troops. So in the Telegraph yesterday, Wednesday, the former Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, who has been active in supporting Afghans who were hugely valuable to British forces, Johnny wrote in the Telegraph, there were only ever about 1,000 to 1,200 badged members of the Afghan special forces. And of course, there were a sprinkling of translators. And Johnny Mercer, who was helping with bringing Afghans across, says, I simply couldn't understand where all these Afghans were coming from. Before we go into it, and I am raging, Liam, I am raging, right? But before we go into it, let's just say that any decent British person would want Afghans who had served alongside British forces in very dangerous circumstances, who were translators, construction workers, stretcher bearers, carrying the injured and the dead. We would all want those people, I think, to be offered support and a safe haven if they needed it. I have no argument with that.
Because, of course, they are at danger of losing their lives to the ruling regime,
Yes,
the Taliban, that we spent
Taliban.
20 years fighting.
But just to finish, this vast number, unaccountable number, complete cock-up with this list revealed, but there's a huge amount of scrutiny now as to whether they were indeed put at risk. And then you had Ben Wallace, Sir Ben Wallace, no less, Sir Ben Wallace, Sir Grant Shapps, men who got us into this one of the most catastrophic errors in modern British history. Both knighted, of course, for their service. Ben Wallace scuttled off as soon as this super injunction, or he claims he applied for an injunction, not a super injunction. But nevertheless, he scuttled off, probably realising what an absolute catastrophe it was. And this leak was not reported for nearly 2 years. And that's because we had this unbelievably draconian legal instrument forbidding, not only bans reporting of this scandal, but conceals the very existence of the order itself. It's absolutely Kafkaesque. So the government could spend £7 billion ferrying these people back and forth under the ECHR, family reunion ruling. They're allowed to bring dependents. So it won't just be 19,000, it'll be 19,000 plus their 14 children. Absolute catastrophe for the country. I believe a huge breach of trust between government and people. I'm going to go further, Liam. I'm going to say it calls the legitimacy of the British state itself into question. And I'm going to ask you something. Is the state now operating against the best interests of the British people?
Well, it's certainly incredibly galling. And in this instance, it is difficult to see where the interests of the British people have been prioritised in the actions by the state. I think we're all still trying to get our head around this story. There's lots that we don't know. Even the journalists that have been very, very close to this story, including our colleagues on the Telegraph, they are still deeply in the dark. There were secret court hearings going on to award this super injunction. A super injunction, of course, it means that you're not only not allowed to report something, you're not even allowed to say that there's something that you can't report. And it's very, very unusual for a judge to grant a super injunction in an area of public policy. And yet in this case, the original judge suggested the super injunction to the government KC. The overall presiding judge actually, I think, did a really good job in this, standing up for transparency. And as Gordon Rayner, our superb colleague in the Telegraph, has reported in the last couple of days, well worth reading Gordon's report about that. It's a very twisty story. It's a very complex story, but it reveals a huge amount about the lengths that the British state will go to. And we must call it the deep state. We must call it the deep state, the lengths that the British state will go to in order to ensure secrecy. I've had quite a lot of experience of this over the years, not least when I was trying to expose the massive failings of various RAF helicopters in the light of the Mulligan-Taj Chinook helicopter crash. And in this case, I think what happened is the state started by justifying the use of a super injunction because they wanted to try and limit the damage to people in Afghanistan who were in danger and are in danger, we must say. This spreadsheet ended up on Facebook for a while. I mean, crikey, who knows who has this spreadsheet now? Originally, the state was saying that it wanted to limit the damage of that by not allowing the emailed list of all the people to go any further. But it transpires, I think it's pretty clear what the state was actually trying to do was to hush up its own failing, and the fact that it had to, as you say, bring in lots of people under the radar in order to bring them to this country, knowing that there would be absolute public outrage, given that this was happening because of an inadvertent email blunder by somebody working in our security services, no doubt late at night or whatever. As so often happens, the cover-up is sort of worse than the cock-up.
Can I just add a tiny, very telling detail which leapt out at me? So these Afghans have been seeded, as it were, around the country, obviously in hotels and private housing. And it seems that they've been sent to some of the poorest areas. And there is a correlation between the riots last summer and the areas where there was the heaviest distribution of these people. So I think that it's pretty clear that, as you say, Liam, that whatever the noble intentions are initially to protect Afghans in Afghanistan, what then happened was it became a reputation management issue in which the most draconian legal instruments, bypassing Parliament, not telling Parliament, and certainly not telling the British people that against their will, thousands of particularly men from this very alien misogynist culture would be imposed on them. The authorities knew full well that the British people would say, not on your Nelly, right? So they did it. They did it deceitfully. They flew people in undercover, arriving at Stansted, apparently, in unmarked planes. Absolutely disgraceful. And one reason your co-pilot is about to self-combust and end up in a little pile of ash on the floor. You may have to come around with a dustbuster. But Ben Wallace says in an interview on the Today programme...
Former Defence Secretary.
Yeah, former Defence Secretary. Says, yes, well, obviously, my most important priority was to protect the Afghans on the list in Afghanistan. No, your most important priority is to protect the British people. And we know, Liam, we know that Afghans are at the top of the list. Afghan men are at the top of the list for the most prolific foreign sex offenders in our country, right?
In proportionate terms compared to their share of the population, yeah. I think what that demonstrates, Allison, the way you just spoke, the passion in your voice, the disconsternation, represents a big shift in British politics, actually. What's happened in the last year to 18 months and this really catastrophic episode, not just in terms of, the money would be insignificant if the country wasn't on the brink of bankruptcy, but we can come to that.
7 billion quid, Liam. Yeah. 7 billion quid, okay, for these people we don't even want.
But there's more than that. What the last few minutes of Planet Normal have demonstrated something really quite profound that's happened in British politics. The whole idea of there are too many people coming into this country, we need to really clamp down on immigration. We really need to stop the boats. Until relatively recently, the Overton window was in a certain place where a lot of people would think that, but they wouldn't necessarily say it. Okay. And the likes of Reform, the likes of Farage would be reprimanded. There were certain people in the Conservative Party who wouldn't dream of saying that ever on the left of the Conservative Party, and almost nobody in Labour would say it. That has now shifted. And the vehicle for that shift, I think, is this issue of the safety of women and young girls in this country. I think that is what makes this a really mainstream issue. Point one. Point two, another thing that makes it a really mainstream issue is the link that's now being made, rightly in my view, between housing shortages and the huge wave of immigration that we've had. I wrote a book called Home Truths quite a few years ago, as you know. And back then, when we were importing, 200 odd thousand people a year, 250,000 people a year, I concluded that wasn't a big impact on house prices, not least because back in the day, I know from my own family's experience, a lot of the people that were coming in were building the houses, right? They were the labour that was doing it. When you're importing 1 million people a year, then I do think that does have an impact on housing at that pace, given that the pace of house building has fallen even more since the data I was using for Home Truths, which was like the early to mid 2010s, as it were. So this story isn't just about the security services and a cock up, and there's some incredible detail out there. There's some really good accounts of this across the press, not least the Telegraph, of all these secret court hearings and really incredible stuff. Journalistic colleagues of ours at the Telegraph and elsewhere, it must be said, under fear of going to prison if they mentioned anything, they breathed a word of this really crazy stuff. So all of that is lots of sort of journalistic daring do and all the rest of it. And I guess, I'm not quite sure this is my conclusion yet, but on the surface, having tried to absorb as much as I can about this story since it came to light on Tuesday, it does strike me that Defence Secretary John Healey does deserve some credit at least for opting to lift the injunction, or allowing the lifting of the injunction, or at least not seeking to prolong the injunction. Again, the details around all of that are a bit sketchy. It's good this has now come out, if only so the people in the dark think long and hard about doing this kind of thing again, though I suspect they will. And I suspect this will just make them even more determined to keep these kind of nefarious activities away from the prying eyes of busybody journalists.
What John Healey said made no sense, except that it was now convenient to do this because, of course, the dread really is of the British people kicking off. So John Healey was basically saying, oh, now we've suddenly decided all the people on the list are actually safe. Why? Why have you suddenly decided? Why weren't they safe 2 years ago? It makes no sense.
They've got some ex-civil servant to sort of stand up that idea, haven't they? To say, oh, if the people are in Afghanistan, they haven't been killed yet by the Taliban, it means they're probably safe. I mean, whatever. I mean, absolutely irresponsible.
Yeah, let me just read. I just looked up. This is the Foreign Office's advice on travel to Afghanistan. There is a risk of violent street crime, home invasion, armed robbery. Make sure your accommodation is secure. Criminal kidnaps. Significant risk of kidnappings of foreign nationals. British tourists at risk. British nationals at risk. Criminal gangs will target anyone perceived to have money for extortion purposes, kidnap victims, assault victims, targeting people who are withdrawing money from banks and ATMs, British dual national being kidnapped at gunpoint, no formally recognised structures or processes of law in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an Islamic country. Country's laws and customs are extremely different to those in the UK. It's illegal to try to convert Muslims to other faiths. And then it goes on, Liam, to say about laws on dress. Obviously, absolutely strict, draconian laws on dress. Women, including foreign nationals, must fully cover themselves in public. Women must be covered head to toe at all times. Now, these are the people they are sprinkling around our country. Can anyone foresee any potential cultural clashes here. I mean, I'm kind of done, really. I'm done with them. I'm just so angry. I can't believe they think it's suitable to expose our people, our vulnerable people. What about vulnerable British people? And also, just to say, so we had PMQs, Prime Minister's questions yesterday in Parliament, Liam. So Parliament has not been able for 2 years, due to an unprecedented super injunction, to demand accountability for a secret scheme which smuggled several thousand Afghans into our country at a cost of up to £7 billion, vast amounts of public money spent in secret, no scrutiny at all, mainly men from this misogynist culture, housed in hotels, military quarters, up and down the country. Hard to imagine, isn't it? A bigger scandal. And not a single MP at PMQs asked a question or expressed any outrage that the democratic process had been sidelined and silenced.
But you know what, Alison, it's okay, because Rachel Reeves is now on the side of business. She wants to boost the economy, as she told the grandees in the Mansion House on Tuesday evening over, well, it's usually sort of rubbery chicken you get at Mansion House, in my experience. An interesting speech, Alison, but I think a really quite desperate speech. Rachel Reeves is basically saying she wants to encourage more people to invest in stocks and shares. She wants to give investors, less hurdles to overcome to invest in stocks and shares, less red tape, less warnings about your investments at risk and all the rest of it. So we all pile into the stock market. The problem is, it makes no sense to pile into a stock market, Alison, in this country or elsewhere, when the government's own actions are making our companies less and less competitive and less likely to grow and actually generate the revenues that lead to the profits, that lead to the dividends, that make the share prices go up and become more valuable, thus attracting more capital in what should be a virtuous circle of growth, innovation, prosperity, and then more tax revenues. I think she is really mixed up. I think she is now being hoodwinked by the financial services industry because she is so desperate for growth and for some decent headlines. She's basically lowering all kinds of regulatory barriers. I'm all for, low regulatory barriers, but I'm all for better regulation. And some of the stuff she's getting rid of is actually important. They are important safeguards, not so much the endless droning on about investment risk and all the box ticking and red tape. But for instance, Rachel Reeves seems to think that the way you get the housing market moving is to ease mortgage lending restrictions. So let's lend everybody, 8 or 10 times their income or whatever, rather than the usual 3 times. Let's juice up the mortgage industry to get the housing market going so people can afford houses. That is completely mad, because all you will do is lead to more demand for a fixed number of houses, making housing even less affordable. It's completely the wrong thing to do. What we need to get the housing market moving is to abolish mad stamp duty, which means so many people aren't selling because there are no buyers, because buyers are having to come up with tens of thousands, in some cases on pretty modest houses, hundreds of thousands of pounds in stamp duty in order to even have a chance of buying a house. And paying stamp duty, a tax to the government, buyers have to, out of their post-tax income. Completely nuts. So I do think she is in trouble, even more than she was this time last week. Because, Alison, since this time last week, we've seen GDP fall. We had last Friday, didn't we? Confirmation that GDP, the size of the economy as a whole, had fallen for the second month in a row.
Yeah.
And then yesterday morning, Wednesday, and this is what Kemi Badenoch did talk about at PMQs, we had confirmation that inflation has gone up again to 3.6%, as I said in the intro. So we are now in danger of a contracting economy and rising inflation, and that is the dreaded word stagflation. And what's happening now, Allison, is even the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is meant to be all goody two-shoes and even-handed and is packed full of, acolytes of special advisors who have worked for Labour ministers in the past. It is not a hotbed of Tory support, the OBR. Even the OBR is now warning that tax rises are curtailing growth. And this follows a very interesting statement last Friday when the GDP number came out from somebody at the OBR who I think is an interesting guy, Professor David Miles. He's one of the top 3 guys at the OBR. And he told this to journalists last Friday. It didn't get widely reported, but the OBR are now officially echoing this. Professor David Miles of the OBR said the scope to simply just raise more and more tax revenue is definitely limited, with further tax hikes creating, says Professor Miles, so many disincentives, and those disincentives, of course, are around saving, investment and working. Professor Miles said looking for taxes, quotes, wherever you can find them, would begin, he says, to cause, quotes, serious damage to the growth potential of the economy. We are now, as I've said many times, beyond the peak of the Laffer curve. I mean, when are people in authority going to listen, right? When are they going to listen to people who know more about economics than they do? When is the Treasury and when are Labour ministers going to understand that if they keep raising tax rates, they will get less and less and less tax revenue? Even the OBR is now saying that. And all you're going to do, if you keep raising tax rates to the delectation of some of the student politicians on the Labour backbenches, you will simply destroy growth. You'll get less revenue overall. You will drive this economy off a cliff. And just when that inflation number came out, what does that mean, Allison? It doesn't only mean that the cost of living is going up. It doesn't only mean, you go into a supermarket and you spend 50 quid and you've got like 4 items in your trolley. It doesn't only mean that we're all suffering from higher gas and electricity bills than we were before COVID. It doesn't only mean that the national insurance increases that I referred to earlier are now feeding directly into inflation. It also means that those nasty financial markets, those pesky gnomes of Zurich, as we used to call them, the people that buy gilts and government debt for pension funds, insurance companies, and so on, they're demanding higher and higher and higher rates to borrow. On that inflation number news, the rate of government borrowing jumped up again. We are now way beyond where we were in terms of the cost of government borrowing than the Liz Truss mini-budget so-called crisis. Where are the broadcasters jumping up and down about the end of the world the way they were back then? Nowhere. Why aren't we talking endlessly about the fact, Allison, that the British government is now borrowing £150 billion every year, and 110 billion of that 150 billion is paying interest on previous debts? As I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that's a Ponzi scheme. Today's Planet Normal guest is Simon Boyd, Managing Director of REIDsteel, a medium-sized manufacturer of steel and steel components based in Christchurch down in Dorset. Founded in 1919, Reed has a proud history, having sold its high-quality products around the world, and it continues to employ 130 people directly and thousands more across Britain through its complex supply chains. Britain's steel industry as a whole employs over 32,000 people directly, with more than 50,000 more jobs indirectly reliant on the sector. Following the demise of iconic steelworks at Port Talbot in Wales and Redcar in the northeast, the UK now has only 2 blast furnaces running, vital for the production of so-called virgin steel used in all kinds of defence and industrial applications. Both of those blast furnaces at the British Steel plant in Scunthorpe. That plant is theoretically Chinese-owned, but Labour's indicated it may soon be nationalised. But much of Britain's steel industry is now made up of relatively small but still strategically important firms such as REIDsteel, run by Simon Boyd. The UK now has the highest electricity costs in the developed world, in part due to our net zero policies. So I started by asking Simon the impact of that reality on UK steelmaking.
Well, net zero policies have been an absolute disaster for not just our business, but every business in the steel manufacturing industry. And more importantly, or just as important, in our supply chain, particularly where we get our steel from, which is in Scunthorpe and Teesside.
What's the impact of net zero specifically? Is it on your energy costs?
Well, energy costs is one of the factors that has had a severe impact on our business. You know, we've seen our energy costs go up at the peak by 400%, and they're now around about 300%, just over 300% higher than they were in 2020.
Crikey, a 300% increase since 2020. And surely energy costs are a major part of your cost base, given that you make steel.
Yes, we're a high energy user. And if you look at the impact of net zero, you know, government and specifiers in the United Kingdom are all hungry for low carbon content. Well, the steel that we make in our country has a high carbon content because it comes from a blast furnace. And low carbon content, it comes from an electric arc furnace. Now, to buy that kind of material, you have to import it.
Because you're using scrap.
That's right. You're using scrap steel, which is a good idea, but there is only enough scrap on the planet to provide about a third of the world's demand. And we do need to invest in EAFs, which are the electric arc furnaces, in the UK. But we must, in my view, retain the ability to make virgin steel, which uses blast furnace technology. And so the government's intervened recently, as you know. It has taken control of British Steel, though it doesn't yet own it. They are now encouraging everybody to use British Steel with one hand, and on the other hand, they're asking everybody to buy materials with low carbon content. So one doesn't work with the other. So that gives specifiers a problem. It gives our steel industry a big problem. The energy costs of British Steel are through the roof, as you can probably imagine. And that's at the core of manufacturing base. And steel gets used in all sorts of components, you know, right down to little bits and pieces you find in computer printers or, you know, and sometimes in wired underwear, you know, that steel
not
comes...
just about big industrial uses.
No.
So the British steel industry, we've only got 2 blast furnaces left that are still going, both in Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire. Of course, Port Talbot's blast furnaces have been doused, as it were, never to be relit. But the British steel industry as a whole, it's still pretty important. It still employs directly and indirectly tens of thousands of people, right?
Absolutely. And I want to dispel a myth here that, you know, people look at steel and think, it's a thing of the past, you know, we need to be on AI now and everything else. But without steel, we wouldn't have the infrastructure, we wouldn't have the buildings, we wouldn't have the engineering brilliance that we have in this country. And, you know, steel making and steel manufacturing has got a bright future, providing government gets its head round the right policies. And at the moment, everything that the current government, and I'm not going to make any excuses for the previous government, they were atrocious in the desperate bid for net zero by 2050. I mean, it's just too soon. We all want a better environment, but all we're doing is exporting UK manufacturing jobs overseas and then re-importing the product we've exported to somebody else to make in a dirty factory. And then we have to burn more carbon, bringing it back in. And we all share one atmosphere.
You've been involved with the production of a new report by the Jobs Foundation into the link between jobs and the government's net zero policies. How damaging for jobs have net zero policies been? Because we hear a lot about green jobs. We're encouraged to believe that the move to net zero is actually creating jobs. But you seem to be saying on a net basis, it's destroying jobs.
Well, it is creating jobs, but the jobs are in China, not in the UK. And what you do is you sink the knife deeper in to what's left of British manufacturing. And
That's what net zero is doing.
that's what net zero is doing. And, look, we all want a better environment and we all want to get there. But it's absolute madness what's going on at the moment. We can improve our blast furnaces. We can replace our blast furnaces with modern, up-to-date blast furnace technology. We can put in electric arc furnaces too and do this, but that requires massive investment. And that's why I called for British Steel to be taken into public ownership, because it's only public ownership that will put that investment in to protect this core industry, which hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on, because it's not just the direct jobs in this sector. It's all the other jobs in the support industries. Let me give you a good example of what's just happened at Port Talbot. They've just started on their electric arc furnace. What's that? 4 years away before it's switched on. And we're importing the steel for the Tata plant in Port Talbot from India. Now, they should have maintained those blast furnaces and kept them running until they got the electric arc furnaces constructed, but that required investment. And of course, when you're foreign owned, when you start selling key industries off to foreign entities, the foreign entities have their best interests at heart, not ours. And look what happened with the Chinese. Had it not been for the people of Scunthorpe, who I'm immensely proud of, standing up and fighting for their industry and refusing the Chinese access to that site, we could have seen that business close and all those jobs go down the road. And businesses like us, 100% reliant on imports.
So you think that the steelworkers at Scunthorpe deliberately stopped the Chinese owners of the plant from coming into the plant because they were worried the Chinese were literally going to sabotage their own plant to knock out production? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I know they did.
That's astonishing.
Well, and I would have been stood there with them too had I not been busy down here arguing through all my connections to try and get this situation to the top of government so that we could take it into public ownership. But the government has a tendency, if in business, when you make a decision to do something, you have to follow through with it. It's no good making a decision and then putting your foot half in. At the moment, government hasn't fully taken British Steel back into public ownership. It's nearly there, but it's given the Chinese time to draw breath and now bring up legal challenges against the whole concept of what the government has done.
You're a businessman. You're a private sector guy. You're not some kind of trade union official. You're not somebody who's ideologically left-wing. And yet you think it's absolutely essential that we have now public sector investment in order to save this sector.
Absolutely. I am a businessman, but that doesn't mean that I don't connect with the people that work in our industry and work for my company. The reality is that any company is all about the people that it employs. And the danger with big business and multinationals, they lose that touch, that connection with people who work there. And I'd like to see that connection reestablished. And it's really important. The Jobs Foundation has the same kind of principles that I believe in, that you look after your people, you take care, you train, you invest, and you take a chance. But government policy is just flying in the face of this. I mean, the budget that the government came out with was anti-growth. I mean, when they said they wanted growth, I've read their industrial strategy, and, it's miles out of date already.
Just pulling out slightly from the steel industry to UK manufacturing as a whole, what has been the impact of the highest industrial energy prices in the Western world, which is what we have, plus high domestic energy prices driven by our net zero policies? What's been the impact of those high energy prices, Simon, on our manufacturing sector?
It's squeezed what's left of UK manufacturing. And it's really sad to see. And this is where the disconnect comes between Westminster and the rest of the country, the bubble that everybody refers to. People don't get out enough to see the damage that's done to society. The people that walk around without hope because they don't see anything coming their way. This green energy jobs is just, there might be some jobs that are offered in it. And green energy, I'm not going to bin it all together, but we're trying to do it too much too soon. And if you look at these energy costs and what's happened, people that work for our company, they're struggling. And these are people on reasonably good salaries. And more, we are looking to buy things off Amazon and everywhere else where you can get the best price. And you have to wait 3 weeks because it's got to come in a container from China. I mean, that's the result of current policy.
Where's this going to end up? Would you say that the UK is pursuing net zero more arduously, faster, to a greater degree than other countries around the world? And if so, what's the impact of that on manufacturing and jobs across manufacturing?
My honest view of this is that the current policy is being pushed by people that are hell-bent on this net zero. Just take a look at some of the other countries that tried this. Germany got this, let's get rid of all our nuclear power stations. Now they're regretting that big
After
style
the Fukushima disaster,
things happen in life, things go wrong. We were the leader in nuclear energy. We're way behind the curve now. We're wasting billions on the ever-rising costs at Hinkley.
And they're in Somerset. Biggest construction site in Europe. Has been going on for years and years and years.
Yeah, but where's the money flowing to?
Yeah.
It's flowing out of the country,
Yeah.
to French and other companies.
Chinese financiers
and
who
Chinese
are backing that, yeah.
So, it's real madness at the heart of successive governments who don't understand the principles of good business.
What would energy policy look like, Simon Boyd, if you were in charge?
Well, I'd be using our own resources,
The drilling in the North Sea?
I'd certainly continue with drilling in the North Sea, and I'd be looking at the coking coal that's available in Cumbria, and I'd also be looking at shale gas. Now, that can reduce our energy costs, and providing it's managed properly, can be done in an environmentally friendly way, and that we have a far more measured and tailored move to modular reactors, which
The small nuclear reactors.
Yes,
Which, of course, Rolls-Royce lead the world in the technology.
Absolutely, and I'd like to partner up with Rolls-Royce and build their buildings, the structures for them, with British steel.
Why not?
Why not? Creating British jobs, which then turns cash round in our local economy, and you can actually start to see that stimulates growth.
And we may stop at being a net energy importer as we currently are.
We could go back to being an exporter of energy, clean energy, but it's going to take a couple of decades to get there. And our institutions and our government, they don't seem to have a long-term vision, and they need one on this. Had they used long-term vision back in the 80s, we'd have been at the forefront of nuclear energy today, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
If Ed Miliband was a Planet Normal listener, we live in hope, what would you say to Ed Miliband?
Well,
it's a family show.
For him to be a listener, he'd have to be within our orbit, would he not? He is so far detached from reality, and I think he's quite dangerous. Look what's happening. I mean,
You're one of the captains of British industry, Simon Boyd. You employ thousands of people. You run one of our major steel companies. You're saying the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change is dangerous.
I would say it is, yes, absolutely dangerous.
How widely held is that view among people of your rank, if I may say so, your seniority in British industry?
100%.
Not in the green energy lobby. They're making plenty of money out of them, aren't they?
Well,
the green blob?
Look, I had a run-in with Government Quango, and there was only two businesses on this panel meeting. And it was the vice president or the vice chancellor of a university, far more qualified to talk than I am. And I was talking about the recent events where we nearly the lights nearly went out because we had no wind, no sun, and we couldn't get all the gas-fired power stations.
It was close, wasn't it?
It was very, very close.
Kind of hushed up a little bit by the media, don't you think?
Hushed up.
Yeah.
And, just think about it if the lights go out and everything goes off. And this academic chap turned around to me, and I've been talked down to a few times in my life, but I'm used to being talked down to by the people on the shop floor telling me where I've got something wrong. And I do listen. So when I get somebody that's overeducated talking down to me, I think I've hit a nerve somewhere. And But the trouble is with some of these quangos is they are so academically led, and I've nothing against academics. They're not business people. They don't get it. How many people on the government front bench have ever run a business? None. They don't understand. You have to make a profit. Now, that's seen as a crime. But what happens to our profits? Well, guess what? We reinvest in the business. We get better facilities for our people. And this...
Once you pay plenty of corporation tax on them, by the way.
Well, tax, look, the NIC increase really...
National insurance contributions to employers.
And we're now starting to see the secondary impact of that coming down through the supply chain.
A lot less hiring going on, you mean, because it's so much more expensive to hire.
Yes, you're looking now, and I hate this, because I really care about our people, but when somebody leaves the company, the question is now, if they're retiring or moving on...
You ain't replacing them.
You're thinking, can we manage without them?
Yeah.
And there's...
No new blood.
There's maybe 50, 60,000 towards the increase, and that's the way a lot of businesses are starting to look at things now. And, well, some businesses have folded. There's been 2 businesses I know in our industry that have folded over the last month, and it's tragic. Who's going to feed the families of all the people that work there? And, businesses like ours are embedded into the local community. We're not multinationals. We can't up sticks and move to Bratislava, We don't pay our tax in Luxembourg or Dublin, with a sweetheart deal, with the EU. We are the biggest unpaid tax collector for HMRC, right? And we employ people. So what mad person would come out with an idea of taxing us more? Because the more you tax, the less they take. It's been
The higher the tax rate, the lower the tax revenue.
It's absolute bonkers,
It's called the Laffer curve. I learned about it from Allison Pearson.
Did you? Well,
the Planet Novel resident economist.
Look, the more support that you give within a business to any sector of the business, the better the results you get. The more you clamp down, the more you hammer, the less results you get, the less engagement you get, the less vigor, the less belief. And it's the same as it steps up that ladder to politics. It's why they're not connecting with the people. Starmageddon.
Simon Boyd, thanks a lot for appearing on Planet Normal.
Au revoir.
So there you go, Allison, Simon Boyd. And I should also mention the Jobs Foundation. The Jobs Foundation is an interesting think tank that focuses on all kinds of aspects of the labour market. I spoke at a seminar on Tuesday morning about a new report that they've brought out, just highlighting how many industrial jobs now are being lost to net zero policies. We've talked about it on Planet Normal in the past. You think the closure of the Grangemouth refinery in Scotland, the closure of the Vauxhall factory in Luton, all kinds of issues, the closure of the blast furnace at Port Talbot, the closure of many projects in the North Sea, oil and gas drilling projects, something that the GMB union has been railing against. No friend of Ed Miliband there. So I do think we're now getting to a point, and you can hear the frustration in Simon Boyd's voice, where so much of Britain's industrial base is saying, hang on, these guys aren't against a better environment. They're not against you using new technology at all. They're just pointing out that whereas up until now, the high energy implications of net zero policies have tended to play out politically in terms of, high domestic gas and electricity bills, but this is also crippling vast swathes of our industry. We're still just about a top 10 manufacturer in the world. Our manufacturing sector employs tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. Almost 1 million people are employed in the British car making industry. And yet so many of these jobs are being lost, and that's hollowing out our economy and indeed hollowing out our tax base.
I thought that was an absolutely brilliant interview, Liam. And I feel proud that on Planet Normal, we can bring people of the calibre of Simon Boyd to Planet Normal listeners, because his analysis was, of course, utterly devastating, but also in a strange way, I found it uplifting. I listened to it twice this morning, and I think it's because I thought we have these absolute clowns running our country. Politicians who want to persecute soldiers who did their duty 40 years ago, who want to run the SAS out of business because they're not allowed to shoot anyone without calling up the Attorney General, and all the madness brilliantly outlined by Simon Boyd of this kamikaze net zero project, the Afghan scandal we discussed extensively at the top of the podcast. And yet here we have people like Simon Boyd. We still have exceptional men and women of true caliber and vision and foresight. And what I found very touching, not just his extreme knowledge about the plight we face and the realism of his diagnosis, but he was conveying to me a sort of still a hopefulness that with the right change of course, we can pull it back, because we do have, as he said, we have exceptional engineers and scientists. But the sheer folly, it's beyond Lewis Carroll, isn't it? That, Scunthorpe or Port Talbot, as he described it, I have a very passionate personal interest there because I have a family member who was working there, and my mum's late best friend's son has a good position in Port Talbot. That steelworks shutting down those great blast furnaces has devastated the area. But as Simon Boyd describes, they could have kept the blast furnaces going, couldn't they, until they were ready to go over into the electric arc furnaces. But we're at the mercy of India. We're at the mercy of China, who, as Simon described so brilliantly, they put their own national self-interest first. And that, from admitting too many Afghans, from pursuing net zero, literally everywhere we look, the British government not putting the interest of British people first. So thank God for Simon Boyd. And I really wish that Simon was the business secretary compared to the wall of numpties we have sitting there. Sorry, as you can tell, I'm feeling quite emotional today, but he did make me feel, thank you, Simon, for talking to us so refreshingly. And you do restore our hope in the fact that it's not all Ed Miliband. We've got someone like you, many people like you, no doubt, who are banging their heads up against a brick wall.
We were going to interview an excellent net zero energy analyst on Planet Normal this week, and we will interview her in the future. She is excellent. But in the end, I knew I was doing this seminar with Simon. Yeah. I knew he would really appeal to you, and I hope to other Planet Normal listeners. And we do try, don't we, as often as we can on Planet Normal, to bring voices in from the front line of the real world, from Planet Normal, people actually doing stuff rather than just thinking and talking about it. Yeah. And he really is a very, very bright guy. And the stuff he mentioned there about the standoff between, steelworkers at Scunthorpe and Chinese owners.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
That actually happened, right?
Yeah.
That's been reported. I mean, including in the Telegraph, it was in early April that happened, where Scunthorpe workers would not allow Chinese management to come in because, in their view, and I think they're basically right, they feel the Chinese are buying these plants around the world to close them down in order to tighten China's grip on the global steel market. China, stand by your bunks, Allison, China already produces, around half of all steel in the world, right? And that's why, finally, the government has smelt the coffee, and that's why someone like Simon Boyd, and I tried to bring this out in the interview, who has spent a lifetime in industry, who knows one end of a balance sheet from another, who's been making payroll for decades, who is a really commercial guy, is saying we've got to nationalize this thing, we've got to keep it somehow because it's so strategically important, and it is so strategically important. And that's coming from me too, and I'm broadly a sort of free market person, as you say. But we're now in a situation where Labour have said they're going to nationalise it, and they haven't gone through with it, so the Chinese are plotting. And who knows how that is going to work out. And in the meantime, people working in Scunthorpe are completely up in the air. They don't know anything about their future. But we mustn't allow people in our kind of political and media class and more broadly to think that, this kind of heavy manufacturing is surely we can all get nice green jobs and we can all work in AI, curating conferences. You need this stuff in a modern economy. You need this stuff, particularly as geopolitics becomes more fraught. We have to reflect reality here. And even the Lib Dems, who of course are holier than thou when it comes to net zero, even they are now recognising they have to rein it in. The Lib Dems have come up with some complex, convoluted plan to try and bring energy prices down by asking for the reforms of something called contracts for difference. Now, without blinding you all with the technicalities, Ed Davey has got a point there. I do think these contracts work badly, and I do think a lot of the green industry is just a racket. They're getting tremendously high prices for their energy because of the way something called the marginal cost pricing structure works and links to gas-fired power stations and so on. Just go with me for now so I don't have to go into it. I've written about it quite a lot, as have many other excellent Telegraph journalists. But I do think now we're in danger of this entire consensus breaking down. And I want cheaper energy. I want us to have less pollution. But the way we're doing this, the way we're going about this, the kind of blind commitment to a net zero 2050 target, to banning all petrol and diesel cars by 2035, it's just moronic to do it in this way. We need to let the market come up with financial and technological solutions rather than saying it must all be about batteries. It must be all about EV cars. Because if it's all about EV cars, we're as dependent on Chinese rare earth production for the batteries as we ever have been on, oil from the Middle East. It's just, again, geopolitically and economically inept.
It is moronic, as Simon Boyd says. We share the same atmosphere, Liam. There's no sort of glass walls surrounding our country, which mean that any attempts we make to cut carbon emissions are going to, that's the stupidity of it. If we're actually importing steel from China and India, which we could be making ourselves with the very simple solutions that Simon had outlined, include mining our own coking coal, fracking in an intelligent way, obviously using, our own North Sea oil. I mean, I know Planet Normal listeners must be sick of me explaining. I just want to leave you with something, Liam, because I think the gap now between the establishment, between the institutions, between the quangos that Simon Boyd talked about, full of these academics, the Ministry of Defence, all of these institutions, the gap between their thinking and where the British people are is a chasm now. And the example that Simon gave, which you just mentioned, of the Scunthorpe workers, let's remember in Llanelli, my own people were going to have their lovely Straddy Park hotel where my mum and her friends went for afternoon tea. That was going to be filled with migrants. The people of Llanelli stood outside that hotel. They camped. They said, no, you're not going to come here and ruin our lovely small town. So I think we can look now. We're already seeing online women discussing making pepper spray legal. Might seem like a small thing, Liam, but women now, we've got young women particularly banding together to say, how do we defend ourselves against these migrants from alien misogynist cultures? So I think it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of years as we see the impact of this uncontrolled migration, the net zero policies. I think the British people are going to say, stuff it. We are fighting back. The veterans I was in Parliament Square with, they're saying, you're not persecuting us. We served our country. We followed the orders of those people across the road in Parliament. And now they've got the bloody nerve to come after us, holding us to account with these European human rights laws that didn't even apply half a century ago. Can you imagine us doing that to politicians? Let's hold them to account by current day standards for mistakes, because God knows they've made enough mistakes. Just finally, I can recommend actually Nigel Farage, ever the keen reader of the scene, posted an excellent video yesterday. It's not on X, I imagine it's on other platforms. It was Nigel's reaction to the news of the Afghan scandal. It's not only is it perfectly judged, he raises the issue of women and children's safety. Haven't heard that from a single other member of another political party. And that, Liam, is why I don't think a reform government in 2029 is likely. I think it's pretty much a racing certainty.
Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, don't we, Allison? The citizens of Planet Normal.
And we've been getting a lot of great stories from listeners in the last couple of weeks, which are under investigation now by our excellent colleagues at the Daily Telegraph. So thank you for those. We had a lot of response, Liam, to the story of Courtney Wright. This is from Tim. The schoolgirl in Rugby sent home for a Union Jack dress must be a victim of racist discrimination, says Tim. Her cultural characteristics were insulted. But no one has alerted the police, as happened to you, Allison, with your tweet. But surely this was blatant discrimination. Why can't the common sense tradition use the same legal attack dogs as the Hope Not Hate Brigade? All these trigger warnings, which should be placed on the Hope Not Hate website as far left extremists, or microaggressions, which I feel when I pick up my grandchildren from school with ever increasing numbers of totally burqa'd women. That is offensive to me, and so a macro or microaggression, which I have to put up with. An article on this lexicon of woke attacks, says Tim, and who can use them would be a great help. As for the government's attacking our soldiers, Tory and Labour, to hell with them. Fair is foul and foul is fair, and also double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. That's our country today. And Sarah says, are you both as outraged and beyond furious as I am to read about Courtney Wright, that young girl sent home from Bilton School on Culture Celebration Day for wearing a Union Jack dress? We have a whole generation of children being taught that it's unacceptable to love your country. And yet we're told that there might be war coming, says Sarah. Does the government really expect Courtney's generation in a few years to bear arms on their behalf? What a joke this land has become. I don't know whether I'm more sad or angry about this story.
This is from Alan, a slightly different view, and that's exactly what we want here on Planet Normal.
Yeah.
Dear Alison and Liam, writes Alan, the Matt Goodwin interview was fascinating. That's last week's interview, of course, and he makes some excellent points. He's clearly on top of his subject in a way few commentators are. However, writes Alan, I'm concerned that Matt alludes to a racialisation of British identity in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. Personally, I don't care if there will be a majority of people who are not white by 2070, says Alan. What I care about is whether these people love this country, love its history, its customs and its values, and want to be British. That goes for the children of third, fourth or fifth generation immigrants as much as those who've recently arrived. The failure of multiculturalism, in my view, is not that we're looking at a country with a minority of white people in 50 years' time, but that we've taught our own children and the children of immigrants of this generation to despise British history, values and culture. Up to now, and to their credit, I have not sensed race being a defining characteristic of British identity from Nigel Farage, Richard Tice or Zia Youssef, of course, the leadership of the Reform Party. If I do, says Alan, even the slightest whiff of it, they will not be getting my vote in 2029. Love the show. Keep up the good work. What a thoughtful email.
Yes, very thoughtful. I think if Matt Goodwin was here, he would say, when he's talking about majority white population, I think there are major concerns, Liam, about culture, about things like Christmas, Easter, our poetry, our art. I think Matt would be primarily concerned about that, but he can be his own defender. This is from Ben. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you both for this show. I can't wait every Thursday to listen to your latest podcast. I'm also a subscriber to the Telegraph app because it's trusted and non-biased like the BBC. So my family, are from Eastern Europe, Transylvania, been living in the UK for 11 years. I work 6 days a week as a self-employed person running a small business in Kent. Since Labour is in power, we are really considering moving back to our country. As the crime is out of control, free speech under threat, cars around us are being stolen, burglars everywhere, so we don't feel safe anymore in Britain. But the main reason for leaving, says Ben, is the illegal invaders on the boats. As soon as those guys are out on the streets, it will be impossible to defeat the terror attacks, the rape and stealing in the UK. I thought I'd share my opinion with you guys, as you are my only trusted media. I don't want my tax to be given to the illegal invaders rather than to hospitals, schools, or the roads. Even after I move home, I will still be listening to your podcast, and I'm sure there won't be a better future for English people. Best wishes and God save the UK. Looks like we're all moving to Transylvania, Liam. Can we come and live with you, Ben? We've got to find someone to go to. Where are we going, Allison?
This is from Peter. Dear Allison and Liam, I'm a lifelong Conservative voter, and I used to think the worst Prime Minister in my 70 years plus was Gordon Brown. But I was wrong. Along came Cameron, who regarded many of his voters as fruitcakes, closet racists and swivel-eyed loons. Perhaps he was modelling himself upon Hillary Clinton when she described half the voting population of the US as a basket of deplorables. A surefire election-winning line, if ever there was one. Not. Next, it was the turn of the useless Theresa May, whose only notable action was to turn a parliamentary majority into a minority in double quick time. To be fair to her, she had stiff competition from the equally useless Johnson, who beggared our country during the COVID period. Then we had a couple of Conservative non-entities, and finally the disastrous Starmer arrived a year ago. God, Peters has his shreddies, hasn't he, when he wrote this? Recently, Guido Fawkes, which of course is a political website, Guido Fawkes revealed that Starmer's Foreign Minister David Lammy has pledged £70 million of taxpayers' money to Singapore, one of the wealthiest per capita nations in the world, in order to fight climate change. Why? Perhaps Lammy had one too many Singapore slings during a previous all-expenses-paid fact-finding junket. Please tell me that this is an April Fool's joke. Whether it is or not, I'll vote for Reform UK next time, unless Kemi Badenoch can turn the Conservative ship around. Looking forward to the next launch of the rocket. Yours, Peter. Briefly, Allison, seeing as Peter mentioned Gordon Brown there, why did I say last Sunday that Rachel Reeves could take at least one or two pages out of Gordon Brown's book?
Yeah, that was puzzling.
Yeah, not because I disregard the damage he did to pension schemes with his abolition of dividend tax credits for pension funds. I'm actually one of the journalists that broke that story back in the late 1990s, not because he sold off gold too cheaply. Yeah, Gordon Brown made lots and lots and lots and lots of mistakes, and he was a broadly statist guy, more than I certainly would be. But he did have the ability to think pragmatically and laterally at times. And I see none of that from our new robo-chancellor, who I think is just a speak-your-weight machine. Brown, for instance, and I highlighted this in the column, he slashed beer duty for small breweries, and he absolutely catalysed a revolution in the British brewing industry with all the microbreweries that happened, all the craft breweries that happened, more, better products, a whole new wave of marketing and culture, lots of community-owned, locally based brewing companies. That was a perfect example of the Laffer curve in action, because you lowered the tax rate, beer duty being slashed in half for breweries producing up to 5,000 hectolitres, about, getting on for 1 million pints, if you like. And you suddenly had all these tax revenues and all these activities that you otherwise wouldn't have had. Gordon Brown did cut corporation tax. He did lower the basic rate of income tax. Yes, he did some really dumb things. Yes, he could be incredibly bullheaded and single-minded in a bad way. But he at least got the fact that sometimes you had to cut taxes in order to get more tax revenue. Brown is the guy, albeit that Mandelson and Blair were pushing him like crazy, who cut entrepreneurs' relief and kickstarted a whole new wave of investment in the UK in the venture capital scene in the late 1990s. He had at least some pragmatism about him at times. Please don't write in and say, I think Gordon Brown's wonderful. I don't. Read it. Most of what I've written in the last 20, 25 years about the guy, I don't. I was one of his biggest critics. And yet, compared to Reeves, even Brown looks relatively pragmatic and capable of strategic thinking and trimming his sails to realities. Even the OBR, I repeat, is now warning Reeves, if you keep raising tax rates, you will drive this economy off a cliff.
Cool, you don't half know stuff, co-pilot. We're lucky to have you. Let's end the emails where we began with cry of outrage from the British. This is from Dan. I was still in the army when the Afghans were arriving. They were settled in soldiers' accommodation, driving unregistered vehicles around, dozens of men hanging around at all hours of the night, no women to be seen as Afghan women are kept inside. Military families felt unsafe. Service wives became afraid to leave their houses. This has directly had an impact on military retention, says Dan, and it's ruined many marriages. Untold harm. This is a national disgrace.
And on that bombshell, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reasoned views. Email of the week, it's my turn. It has to be Peter for talking about Gordon Brown and then giving me a chance inadvertently to explain myself. Because we did talk about it earlier in the podcast.
Peter, who sounds almost as agitated as co-pilot Pearson.
That's not possible. The word almost is doing a lot of word in that sentence. So, Peter, send us an email to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Put mug winner as your subject heading. Give us your postal address, and a rare as rocking horse poo Planet Normal mug will be sent to you. And so, Allison, as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal for another week and the madness of planet Earth comes back into view, thanks as ever to our producers, Cass Ho, James Hodgson, Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.